In the previous video, we covered a brief introduction to CSS and I introduced you to CSS selectors. As we learned in the previous video that a selector is basically a way of selecting an element for styling purposes. Now we can select the elements by their type, by their ID, by their class or by their attributes. So let us create a new folder inside our CSS folder and name it as one.selectors. And inside it, let us create a new file and name it as index.html. So right here, let us quickly scaffold our basic HTML boilerplate. So type exclamation and press tab, CSS selectors. Now right inside our selectors folder, let us create a new file and name it as styles.css. And let us also link our CSS file in here inside the head section. So link style.css, styles.css. In the previous video, if you recall, we selected a paragraph element. There we selected the element by its type, right? Which is the P element. But we can also select an element by its ID. Let us create a div with an ID of games. So hash games, press tab. And this ID is a unique identifier that is unique for an element. Now to style this element, let us go to our styles.css file and type hash games and the CSS declaration block like this. So hash here represents that we are looking for an element that has an ID of games. Next, we can also select an element or a bunch of elements by their class. So inside this div with the ID of games, let us create three h2 elements with the class of games. So h2.game, so we are using emit here, and multiply with 3 to get 3 elements. Press tab. Let us give some dummy text here. So this is some text. Here let us say lorem 5, lorem 3. Now to style each of these h2 elements, we can go to our style sheet and type dot game and the CSS declaration block where we can define our CSS rules. So this we will see in just a minute. So the only thing that you need to remember here is that we cannot have multiple elements with the same ID, but we can have multiple elements with this same class. So the IDs must be unique. We can also select elements by their attributes, but it is not that commonly used. So for this, let us say we have an input element with the type of text. So write down here, let us add an input with the type of text, and let us add another input with the type of number. And let us say we only want to select the input element with the type of number. So for this, we cannot use the type selector because the type selector input will grab both of our inputs, right? Which we don't want. So to grab just the input element that has the type of number, we can go to our style sheet and use the attribute selector. So here we can say input and type as number. So let us give this a border of 2 pixel solid hash CCC, and let us give this a preview in the browser to see if this works or not. So you can see this works. By using the attribute selector, we were able to select the input with the type of number, and this makes that these styles get applied only to the inputs that have the specific attribute type set to number. So this was all about the basic selectors. Next, let us talk about relational selectors. So by using the relational selectors, we can select elements based on their relationship with other elements. So let me demonstrate this. Let us go back to our HTML file and right inside the div that has the ID of games, let us add one more element. So let us add a paragraph element and add some dummy lorem ipsum content to it. Now let us say we want to style this paragraph. One way to do this is by giving this element some ID or a class, but there is another way as well. Other way would be to first select this div with the ID of games, and then inside this div we can select this P element. So let us head over to our styles.css file and type hash games, and then inside it we want to select our paragraph element like this, so P, and then we define our CSS rule for this element. So here, as you can see, we are combining two different selectors. One is the ID selector, other one is the type selector. So here let us set the color property to #CBD, which is light purple. So this is also called as a descendant selector. Now there is a problem with this. This rule will get applied to every paragraph element that we have inside this div, right? So for example, if we go back to our HTML5, you can see we are getting this paragraph element with the light purple shade. But if I duplicate this element a couple of times, all of them will get the same color. Okay? Now let us say after this paragraph, we add a section with another paragraph. So right inside here, section paragraph lorem 10. Now this second paragraph, which is this one, will also get the same color which we are getting for this one. So let us give this a preview, and you can see both are getting the same color of light purple. Both paragraphs are using the same color. But what if we want to style only the first paragraph, that is this paragraph, that is the direct child of this div with the ID of games? So to achieve this, we have to type a greater than sign between these two selectors. So right here, #games and then greater than sign and then P. So let us give this a preview. Now you can see only the first paragraph is getting the light purple color, and the second one takes the default color of black. So this is how you can apply styles only to the direct child elements of some element. Next we have another relational selector that we can use for selecting siblings. So back to our HTML, let us add a paragraph next to our div with the ID of games. So lorem 10. So let us say we want to style this paragraph element, that is the direct sibling of this div with the ID of games. So we can target this paragraph by using a plus sign. So let us head over to our CSS file. So #games, and we want a sibling of this, which is a paragraph element. So for sibling, we are using a plus sign. And let us give the paragraph that is a sibling to the div with the ID of games a color of lime green. So with this in place, let us give this a preview, and you can see this works fine. So this is how we select a paragraph that comes immediately after the div with the ID of games. Now if you go to our markup and add an extra paragraph right after this div, so p lorem 10, and give this a preview, you can see that this extra paragraph doesn't have the lime green color, right? It gets the default color of black. So what I want to do is that I want to give the lime green color to all the paragraphs that comes right after this div. So both of these paragraphs should get the lime green color, right? So for this, we can replace the plus sign with the tilde sign. So back to our CSS file and replace this plus with the tilde sign, which you can find at the top left corner of your keyboard, like this. So this will select all the paragraph elements that are general siblings of the div with the ID of games. So let us give this a preview, and you can see that now both of our paragraphs have this lime green color. So now we are done with the relational selectors. Let us talk about another group of selectors that are called as pseudo class selectors. So to demonstrate this, let us define a div with two paragraphs. So right here, div with an ID of element, and add two paragraphs, lorem 10 and one more lorem 10. Now in CSS we have a bunch of pseudo classes that are automatically applied by the browser. So pseudo classes are not real classes, but these are classes that browsers apply by default. So to style this, let us head over to the CSS file and use a pseudo class. So all the pseudo classes start with a colon, and here we can use the first child pseudo class to select the first paragraph that is sitting inside the div with the ID of element. So #element to select the element, and here we want to select the first paragraph that is sitting right inside the div with the ID of element. So colon to define the pseudo class selector first -child, like this. So let us increase the font size of the first paragraph within our div to 150%. So font size 150%, and let us set the color to blue. So let us give this a preview. So you can see this works, and here we didn't had to assign a class to the first paragraph. So this is what we call as a pseudo class selector. Next, let us say if we want to add an h2 element right inside our div. So right here, let us add our h2 element, and here let us say this is some important heading. So now you will see that our style on the paragraph will be gone, and it will now get applied to this h2 element. So save the changes and give this a preview, and this is what we get. So here you can see our CSS rule breaks. So here we can use another pseudo class selector called as the first of type. So let us now give this a preview by adding it first. So here change this to first of type and give this a preview. So now you can see both the heading and the first paragraph got the styling that we just applied. So to understand this, let us go back to our markup, and you can see inside this div with the ID of element, we have one h2 element and two paragraph elements. So this first of type pseudo class selector gets applied to first element of each of the types that we are using right inside this div. So it selects the first h2 element because it is the only one of its kind inside this div, and it applies these styles that we are defining right here to the h2 element, right? Then we have two paragraph elements. So it selects the first paragraph element because this p element is the first of its type being used in this div, right? Now since we want these styles to get applied only to the first p element within this div, we can specify that by being more specific, right? So go back to our styles.css file and just say inside the div that has an ID of element, I want the first of type for paragraph. So no matter how many paragraphs we have inside the div with the ID of element, I only want to style the first paragraph. So I say p colon first of type and give these styles, right? So now you will see that the styles for the h2 element will be gone. So let us give this a preview. So now you can see these styles are only getting applied to the first paragraph element that is sitting inside the div. Now let us say we want to style the last paragraph that is sitting inside the div with the ID of element. So for this we can make use of the last of type pseudo class selector on the p element like this. So hash element, I want the paragraph last of type. So I want the last paragraph element that we are having inside the div with the ID of element, and to that last paragraph let us give a color of orange, a border of 2 pixel, solid hash ccc. So save the changes and give this a preview, and you can see this works. Now sometimes you want to style elements based on their position within some element. For example, let us say we have a list of items and we want that all the elements that are sitting at odd positions to appear bold. So let us head over to our markup and add a ul element to demonstrate this. So ul, and I want 5 li's, and let us add some text inside each li as well. So element and a placeholder and press tab. So now in order to style all the odd items of our list, we can select the list. So right here let us say ul, and then on the li we can make use of a CSS function which is also called as a pseudo class selector. So the CSS function that we need in this case is the nth child, and in between the parentheses we can pass a value or an argument. So if we specify odd as the argument, then this rule that we will define in just a minute will get applied to all the odd items of the list. So for all the odd items of our list, let us set the font weight to 300. So font-weight 300. Let us change this to 800, right? So let us give this a preview, and now you can see that all the odd items of our list are now in bold. So the first element, the third element, and the fifth element, right? Similarly to odd, we can use even. So change this to even and give this a preview. And now you can see that this turns all the items sitting at even positions to bold. We can also use a formula here like 2n, and this will select every even element of the list. So let me show you how you can do this. So 2n and give this a preview. So this also selects every even element of the list and apply these styles on the elements that are sitting at even positions. Next, let us talk about other pseudo classes. So let us head over to our HTML file and add an anchor tag and set the href attribute to https://google.com. Go to Google. So we have a couple of pseudo class selectors that we can use while working with hyperlinks. So let us give this a preview first. So for the hyperlink, you can see as the default color that the browser gives it to a visited link, it gives the hyperlink a color of purple. So let us say we want to change this color. So to select the visited links, we can use the pseudo class selector visited. So here we can say a:visited, and let us set the color for the visited link to dark golden rod. So let us give this a preview, and you can see now the visited link is getting this dark golden rod color, right? Next, let us talk about the hover effect. Let us say when the user hovers over this link, the color of the link should change to pink, right? So for this we can use the hover pseudo class selector on our anchor tag and set the color to pink. So right here, a:hover and set the color to pink. So let us give this a preview, and you can see on hovering over the link, the color of the link changes to pink. Now with the hover pseudo class selector, it is also recommended to use the focus pseudo class selector so that if the link gets focused using some key like the tab key of the keyboard, it also gets the pink color just as we are having in case of hover. Okay, so let us give this a preview and try this out. Put a comma and say a::focus, and back to the browser. Let me use the tab key. Okay, so you can see this turned pink once it got the focus. So this was all about the pseudo classes. Next, let us talk about pseudo elements. Now sometimes there may be a case in which you want to style a part of an element. For example, say first letter or first line of a paragraph. This is where we can make use of the pseudo element selectors. So let us head over to our HTML file and add some dummy content. So right here, let us add a paragraph element and add some lorem ipsum inside it. So lorem 10. So let us say I want to style the first letter of this paragraph, which is this capital L. So for this, let us first wrap the first letter of the paragraph with a span element. So span, and here let us add the capital L, and let us give this a class of character. So span class character, and now let us define a CSS rule for elements of this class. So back to our styles.css dot character. So for this letter that we wrapped around span, let us set the font size to 160%. So font size 160%, and font style to italic. So let us give this a preview to see what we get. So you can see our first letter is now having a font size of 160% and is in italic, right? Now we have a better way for styling the first letter of the paragraph than this way, so we can make use of pseudo elements that CSS provides. So let us see how we can leverage them for this purpose. Let us go back to our markup and remove the span element with the class of character, and instead make use of the pseudo element to style the first letter of our paragraph. So back to our HTML file, remove this and change it back to this, and inside our styles.css file, instead of targeting it by using the class, we can use the pseudo element first letter, so first hyphen letter. Just by writing this, we are targeting all the paragraphs and styling the first letter of each of the paragraphs that we have on our HTML page. So to be a bit more specific, we can add a ID right here. So let us say IMP, and here we can use the ID, so hash IMP and the first letter of this paragraph, right? So save the changes and give this a preview, and you can see this works as well. So you can see this works, but in general we use double colons right here, and then let us give this a preview. You can see this works as well. Now let us see another pseudo element selector in action. Let us say I want to turn the first line of each of our paragraphs that we are having on this page into bold, right? So for this, let us go down below and add a CSS rule for same. So let us go after all our paragraphs that we are having on the page, and we are looking to target the first line for each of these paragraphs. So we can make use of the first line pseudo element, and let us add a font weight of 700. So let us give this a preview in the browser, and now you can see that the first line for each of our paragraphs has turned to bold with a font weight of 700. Okay. Now if we select some text by default, you can see the background color of text becomes blue. So you can see right here, I am selecting some text. What if we want to make the background to take some other color? Let us say yellow. So for this, let us use the selection pseudo element, and let us say we want the paragraphs to take yellow color on selection. So head over to styles.css, and here we can make use of the pseudo element selection background color. Set this to yellow. So on selection, we want the background color for the paragraphs to turn to yellow, and for our h2 elements as well, let us use the color Dodger blue. So h2, on selection, we want the background color to be Dodger blue. So let us give this a whirl, and you can see if we select a paragraph, then it gets the yellow color as the background. If we select any h2 heading, then it gets the Dodger blue color as the background color. Okay. Next, we have another useful pseudo element for setting the content before the content of any element. So let me demonstrate this. So back to our HTML file. So here is our paragraph, as you can see, with the ID of IMP, and this is the content of the paragraph. What if we want to insert something before the content of every paragraph on the page? So right before this paragraph, so right here, we want to insert something. So let us go back to our CSS file and see how we can do this. So for this, we can make use of the pseudo element selector called as before. So for each of our paragraphs, we can make use of the before pseudo element selector, and here let us set the content property to whatever we want to set right before the content of every paragraph. So let us say I want to add 3 asterisks like this. So let us give this a preview to see what we get. Now you can see that each and every paragraph of our page is having 3 asterisks before the content, right? So now right click on these 3 asterisks and click on inspect. So here you can see our pseudo element before. Now we can also apply any other styles to this pseudo element as well, though it is not a concrete HTML element like a heading or a paragraph. Similarly, we have another pseudo element after for inserting content right after the content of any element. So let us add that as well. So right here, put a comma and p : after. So let us give this a preview. And now we also have 3 asterisks right after the content of all our paragraphs. So you can see before and after, and in between these two, we have our content of the paragraph sandwiched between the two, right? So this was all I wanted to cover about selectors in CSS. In the very next video, let us learn about specificity of selectors. So let's catch up in the very next one.